So according to some exit polls that were conducted by Edison Research, President Trump did better in 2020 versus 2016 with every single demographic group except for white men this election season, where he actually lost a little bit of ground.
So back with us to examine why that may be, Democratic strategist Jennifer Holdsworth and journalist Zed Jelani. Good to see you guys.
Good to see you.
Zed, let me start with you. I think we've talked a lot about this with you on this program, and it absolutely fascinates me. Donald Trump won more of the non-white vote for the GOP than any nominee since 1960, Richard Nixon, pre-Civil Rights Act. How do you square that? What do you think happened?
Well, I think it makes a fair bit of sense if you really think about it. So if you look at the first 3 years of the Trump administration, wage growth for the bottom end of like blacks and Latinos actually was pretty good. Like, it was actually better than it was under most of the Obama administration. I don't think this was entirely Trump's doing. I think there was a bunch of things going on, including the business cycle and so on and so forth. But I do think that he did actually deliver somewhat for a lot of people at the bottom end here. And that probably earned him a little bit of support. And on top of being an incumbent, right? I think being an incumbent also kind of helps you with a lot of voters who were skeptical of you initially. I think if you add that into the reality that as America becomes more diverse, people are going to intermingle, they're going to intermarry, they tend to socialize with different groups of people. I think you are going to see a competitive election for the minority vote. I don't even the people who wrote the like Demographics or Destiny, which is like Ruy Teixeira and John Judas, have come out and conceded that it doesn't mean that these voters are always going to be a lock for Democrats, right? Because as there are more of them, they will be treated less as a traditional outgroup, meaning they'll be small, have very concrete politics, and they'll be more of a traditional in-group, meaning that you'll have to actually court them. You'll have to actually be in a scenario where there is a competitive election, because as there's more and more people, their viewpoints tend to become more diverse. I also think the Trump administration just courted minority voters very aggressively compared to other Republicans. Like, if you actually look at a lot of their messaging, if you look at a lot of the rallies in the kind of the latter stage, particularly in Florida, they had Spanish language music at Hispanic voters. And actually, I had a friend in the Obama campaign who did something very similar to win Florida for Obama in 2012. So they were actually somewhat imitating Obama tactics. And I think that it did kind of pay off for them. Now, in terms of some of the white vote, not turning out for them, you have to remember that's something like 35% of America as well. Like, white guys are 35% of America. So that's a huge group. They're very left-wing white guys, very right-wing white guys. But I think that, that goes to larger trends of just Trump not necessarily being able to bring his popularity above water. But they did do some very, I think, smart targeting of a few groups that improved their status in some places. And I think many people in the Republican Party are looking at that and thinking, why didn't Mitt Romney pull that off? Well, probably because Mitt Romney ran as Richie Rich against Obama in an election where everyone hated Wall Street and there was massive recession, right? Trump may be Richie Rich, but he also has a sort of like, black sheep air to him where he can, piss off elites and kind of he can at least sound some populist notes, which Romney didn't do at any point ever. So, I think there's sort of some lessons here for the GOP on both what works and what doesn't work. Because I think Trump did a little bit of both in both buckets. So
I think you're exactly right.
What do you think, Jen? How do you make sense of this data?
So I don't think it's statistically significant enough for like the Democrats to panic or anything. But I do think that there's some warning signs in there, right? Yes, no question. The Trump campaign had a minority outreach program. They absolutely did, which is more than I can say for Republicans in the last couple of decades, right? But Democrats need to stop treating voters of color as a monolith, right? You don't just speak to the African-American community about criminal justice reform. That's racist. You don't just speak to the Latino community about immigration. That's racist, right? You have got to make sure that as a party and as a platform, you are focused on all issues to all communities. Don't say one thing to one community and another thing to another community. I think that that's reflected in these numbers. I'm not going to completely say it's the Democrats' fault. It's not. Again, I don't think it's statistically significant. But there is no question that the Trump campaign also had a massive disinformation effort in certain parts of the country. Calling Joe Biden a socialist, I think, Crystal, you would take significant exception to that statement, right?
Yeah, but they do that.
Disinformation.
But also, Jen, they do that with everyone. They did that to Obama, too.
Well, it's also just called campaigning. It's not disinformation.
Here's the other piece. I think the Trump
campaign took it to a new level.
Here's the other piece, Jen, that I wanted to get from you, which is that when Kamala Harris was chosen for the ticket, What was the reasoning that we were given, like through the media and the campaign? The idea was, okay, we put a trailblazing black woman on the ticket, and absolutely she's going to excite minorities. We're going to have great turnout. And in fact, that didn't materialize. Do you think that there's going to be any reckoning with that it's not enough? I mean, that also is racist to be like, oh, well, if we put a black person on the ticket, of course black people are going to come out and vote for her, is also a sort of form of soft racism. Do you think there's going to be any reckoning with that or any understanding of that?
So I take issue a little bit with the premise of that. I don't think that that's entirely why she was put on the ticket. She's unbelievably qualified, right? I think she was also going to excite suburban women around the country, which she did, right? And I think that we have black women to thank if we pick up Georgia. Stacey Abrams has done an incredible job registering people after she lost her own race, right? So I think that there's a variety of reasons why Kamala Harris was put on the ticket. But we also have to look how these communities voted. 90% of African-American turnout went to the Democrats. That's higher than it was for Hillary, right? So perhaps Kamala on the ticket did in fact do what you're saying, right? So I think there's still a lot of data to be analyzed here. I think Kamala Harris was an absolute boon to the ticket.
It's interesting. Well, Zed, I mean, if you look at actually black men, it seems that Trump significantly improved his margins there, up to 18%. I mean, look, it's still 18%. It's not anything great, but I think Hispanic men might be 50% in some cases, in some counties. I don't want to, in like Florida and in Texas.
And also, if we've learned one thing, it's to take polls with a grain of salt all the way around, too, by the way.
Very true. I just think it's fascinating to see that realignment on the ground. And I think, Zed, this is something I've talked about a lot, obviously, is that if you're a Republican Party, kind of have two choices. And of course, I saw Mitch McConnell out there yesterday saying, we got to win back the suburbs. We got to win back these white women and all of that. And it seems that they're just staring, they're looking at their future and they can't even see it right in front of them.
Yeah, I mean, there's a certain level of, I think there's a certain level of arrogance in presuming that people will vote in a similar pattern for like the rest of their lives. Like I think we discussed last time I was on that, if we talked about 10 years ago, Obama was easily winning the state of Ohio, right? In 2008 and then 2012, he won Ohio as well. Now Ohio is a fairly comfortable Republican state, right? We would have thought we were all smoking something really good if we were talking about the Democrats winning the state of Arizona, which seems like it's very likely they did this time. Certainly they did in 2018 with Kristen Sinema. So I think that there is, if any political party gets stuck in a stasis where they're saying we have a certain constituency, that constituency is never going to change. Our people who are going to vote for us are never going to stop voting for us. People who don't vote for us will never start voting for us. Then I think they're on a path to defeat. And I think one thing that maybe is a positive lesson that Republicans can learn from Trump is that Trump didn't necessarily think that he had just one base, and he didn't think there was necessarily just one way to campaign. He was willing to deviate from Republicans in ways sometimes that really hurt him, but also sometimes in ways that actually ended up benefiting him, that ended up pulling him the win in 2016, and ended up getting him surprising wins in 2018 and in 2020 in terms of states. So I think that there is a lesson here that you're never going to know what the future electorate looks like, right? You do, as Jennifer would say, you have to look at all voters at all times with all issues and really see how things are changing, because they're always going to be changing. There is no permanent Democratic majority or whatever the phrase is. There is no demographics or destiny. People are individuals. They change their minds. They have different orientations. The world changes. The events change. We had no idea this coronavirus was coming. I think without it, maybe Trump would have won this year.
Yeah,
I think you're right.
Like honestly,
right.
But we have no idea what's going to happen in the future. So.
What were you going to say,
I think we also need to focus on one other thing here. A lot of the conversation we're having surrounds the Electoral College and how we're eking it out in certain states. Let's also face the reality that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have received more votes for the presidency and vice presidency than any candidate in the history of the United States. Over 70 million votes. That is statistically significant, right? Not to mention he's going to wind up probably above 5 million difference in the popular vote. Again, very significant. And I think these are things that are getting missed in the conversation around demographics because we're specifically focused on the outdated Electoral College.
I think it's a totally fair point to talk about the popular vote. Okay, guys, really, thank you very much. Really good analysis.
Great to see you both. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up on Rising, founder of the Journal of American Affairs, Julius Krein, is going to talk about Trump's win in Ohio, the future of the GOP, where we may be headed from here when Rising continues.